citizens of Africa, I preach in the name of the Universal Negro Women Association and African Communities League of the World. You may ask, what organization is that? It is for me to inform you that the Universal Negro Women Association is an organization that seeks to unite into one solid body the 400 million Negroes of the world.
Pan-Africanism, at its most basic level, is the belief that African people, both on the African continent and in the diaspora, share not merely a common history, but a common destiny. Who would have thought that a simple country boy, born almost 50 years after slavery was abolished in the British colonies, would go on to provide the most comprehensive blueprint for the liberation of his people.
Running around the flag, running around the red, gold, black, white, from us and song.
I was born in the island of Jamaica, British West Indies, on August 17, 1887. My parents were black Negroes. My father was a man of brilliant intellect and dashing courage. He was unafraid of consequences. My mother was the direct opposite of my father. She was a sober and conscientious Christian, too soft and good for the time in which she lived, always willing to return a smile for a blow, and ever ready to bestow charity upon her enemy. Of this strange combination I was born 36 years ago, and ushered into a world of sin, the flesh, and the devil.
The black man's Messiah was born Malchus Mosiah Garvey. He would later change his name to Marcus. His mother, Sarah Garvey, wanted to name him Moses, sensing that her son would become a leader, like Moses of old. Garvey's parents had 11 children, but only he and his older sister, Indiana, lived to adulthood.
As a child, I went to school with white boys and girls like all other Negroes. I never heard the term Negro used once until I was about 14, when my little white playmate and I parted. Her parents thought the time had come to separate us and draw the color line. They sent her and another sister to Edinburgh, Scotland, and told her that she was never to write or try to get in touch with me, for I was a Negro. After my first lesson in race distinction, I never thought of playing with white girls anymore, even if they might be next door neighbors. At home, my sister's company was good enough for me, and at school, I made friends with colored girls next to me. At maturity, the black and white boys separated and took different courses in life. I grew up then to see the difference between the races more and more.
The adolescent Garvey has already developed a clear-eyed understanding of the social laws that govern his world. He leaves school at the age of 14 to work as a printer's apprentice in the shop of his godfather, Alfred E. Burroughs. In 1903, a violent hurricane swept through the Jamaican countryside, destroying much of its landscape and vegetation. Sarah Garvey had lost all of her crops and became destitute. Wanting to provide more support for his mother, young Marcus decided to head to Kingston to advance his career as a printer. The nation's capital is a far cry from his rural home in St. Anne's Bay, but Garvey settles in one of the poorest sections of the city, known as Smith Village. His mother, Sarah, along with his sister, Indiana, later joined him there, where they struggled to find regular employment.
So as he moves to Kingston and starts working as a printer, starts working in the writing world, he sees very clearly that his strong African features, his dark skin, will work against him unless he sort of abandons his black pride and moves up in the system to a sort of socially accepted, lighter-skinned, lighter-looking way. And Garvey fundamentally rejects that.
By the time Garvey becomes a teenager, you've got these labor patterns where Africans are going from different islands, the Windward and Leeward Islands, they're traveling around for work, for labor. So when Marcus Garvey comes into his teens, he's looking around, he's reading, of course, he's studying, and he's also gaining skills as a printer, he's writing, he's looking, and he's seeing these black people bristle against colonialism wherever they are.
There was never really a victory for British colonization here. Jamaica was always in a state of civil war between the European agenda and the African struggle for freedom. And that generated a tremendous amount of inner confidence and courage. It really produced in the Jamaican community a determination to survive and to be. And he was quintessentially a product of that.
By 1907, Marcus Garvey had risen to the ranks of master printer and foreman at the P.A. Benjamin Company. As vice president of the Printers Union, he was involved in an unsuccessful strike by his fellow workers, seeking better wages and working conditions. Garvey was fired and branded a troublemaker, further cementing his bond with the working class. Compounding this difficult period, his mother, Sarah, who envisioned her son as the Negro Moses, dies in March 1908. It is another hard milestone, pressing the young 20-year-old Garvey in his search for a future not yet within his grasp. He sought out J. Robert Love as a mentor, bringing his ambitions and questions to the fiery preacher and social reformer, who was also a masterful orator and publisher of the weekly journal, the Jamaica Advocate. In his young protege, Love found a willing disciple. At age 21, he starts his very first newspaper, which ceases publication after only 3 issues. But the power of the press has been cemented in Garvey's mind as he goes on to publish more successful newspapers. The roots of what we now refer to as Garveyism begin to emerge.
One of the things that stands out for this vision is that when Garvey traveled through Central America, right, this is before he founded the United Negro Improvement Association, he looked around and he saw that everywhere in terms of political power, socio-economic power, people of African descent were at the bottom of the ladder. And so he asked himself this question. Either one accepted the idea that this was sort of preordained, right, the natural order of things, or one began to look at what were the historical and political conditions that led to this kind of injustice.
So he discovered several things, and those things he owes the rest of his life. Number one, he discovered the terrible conditions of the Jamaican and Caribbean workers in Limon. So he had the opportunity to see also from inside what was going on in the United Fruit Company and then see the effect on the workers outside. The reaction of the Limon elite, the black elite, against him was very strong. So they were not very concerned about the terrible conditions of the workers and those that were out in the farm. They were not so much concerned about those people.
After a brief stint in Costa Rica, Garvey travels to Panama and other Central and South American countries. The brutal working conditions of the Caribbean migrant workers, whom he tries to organize, are another rude awakening. With a world to conquer, Garvey returns to Jamaica near the end of 1911 and soon departs for England.
Marcus Garvey believed as a young man that England was the motherland, and that anybody who had any ambition would come at some stage to see what they could do. So he came to England in 1912. He was in his early 20s. And he had no papers, he had no entree into society, he had no means of supporting himself, really. And he came initially and just worked on the docks. Eventually he heard that there was a new journal starting called the African Times and Orange Review, which is run by this man called Juz Muhammad Ali. He managed to get a job working for Ali, not as a journalist, not as a writer, but as a messenger, as a handyman.
The Egyptian-born black nationalist and master propagandist, Juz Muhammad Ali, helped to sharpen Garvey's focus on black nationhood. but a certain American scholar would have the most profound influence on him.
I read Up From Slavery by Booker T. Washington, and then my doom, if I may so call it, of being a race leader dawned upon me in London. I asked, where is black man's government? Where is his king and his kingdom? Where is his president, his country, his ambassador, his army, his navy, his men of bill of affairs? I could not find them, and then I declare I will help to make them. I was determined that the black man would not continue to be kicked about by all the other races and nations of the world. I could not remain in London anymore. My brain was afire. There was a world of thought to conquer.
On June 17, 1914, Marcus Garvey boards the SS Trent, heading for Jamaica, alongside the only other third-class passengers on board, a West Indian missionary returning from Basutoland with his African wife.
I really never knew there was so much color prejudice in Jamaica, my own native home, until I started the work of the Universal Negro Improvement Association. Men and women as black as I, and even more so, had believed themselves white under the West Indian order of societal. I had to decide whether to place my friends and be one of the so-called black whites of Jamaica and be reasonably prosperous, or come out openly and defend and help improve and protect the integrity of the black millions and suffer. I decided to do the latter. I became a marked man, but I was determined that the work should be done.
With the help of several associates, Marcus Garvey forms the Universal Negro Improvement and Conservation Association and African Communities League, launching it on Emancipation Day, August 1st, 1914. A young Amy Ashwood, who would later become Garvey's wife, is one of the organization's first officers. Its mission of uniting all Africans worldwide is the hallmark of the philosophy that will become known as Garveyism, with Marcus Garvey as its chief creator, president, and traveling commissioner.
Here you've got a guy who comes from the stable working class, and who's able to educate himself. And I felt that this man really had an awful lot of awareness about the world in which he lived. He had informed himself, and he was able to converse on a lot of different topics.
Garvey, as a teenager, was involved in elocution contests. In the schools, the young people were taught how to articulate ideas, how to debate, and Amy Ashwood Garvey, his first wife, it was said, beat him in a debate at East Main Street Baptist Church in around 1914. But the oratorical skills that he demonstrated were honed, developed in Jamaica as a teenager in these competitive challenges.
On King Street, you just find Sunday evening people gather. People just gather and get reasoning. Out of that came a lot of pastors who developed their own church. So I think that's where he inculcated that natural from, in an environment of origin.
Garvey's followers were extremely loyal to him. Some critics went as far as to describe this unwavering support as fanaticism. Up, you mighty race, was a clarion call to the black man to reclaim his best self and not be left out of mainstream society.
Garvey was seeking to empower people. To me, that willingness to give, that willingness to try to benefit people all throughout the world through his knowledge and also through his ideas for projects to materialistically, economically, spiritually benefit people in a tangible way. I think people were gravitating towards the gift that he gave.
He wanted to create something in Jamaica that was a mirror image of Tuskegee, because he felt that you had to have the skills, the industrial skills of an industrialized society in order to build your own society. And that's what Booker T was doing at
Tuskegee in terms of the engineers, etc., that were being trained in those types of skills.
He writes to Booker Washington in 1914 and says, you know, we need some help. I want you to help us as we're working toward this Universal Negro Improvement Association. And then gets a reply from Booker Washington saying, oh, well, if you're going to come to the United States, you're welcome. We'd like to see you. And now he's thinking beyond even the Caribbean. He's thinking about the greater African world.
Marcus Garvey sets his sights on the United States as the strategic base for his global plan. Sadly, he would not get a chance to meet his hero, Booker T. Washington, who dies in November of 1915. The Negro Moses lands at the port of New York on March 23rd, 1916, and heads straight for the Mecca of the black world.
It's hard for me to see how, under the circumstances that were far more difficult in this country and in New York and in my beloved Harlem, how he was able to motivate and bring together so many people of color.
Marcus Messiah Garvey came and brought the African consciousness of the Roaring Twenties. And so Harlem was not a dead community. It was a community ready for rebirth. And so the New Negro and the Harlem Renaissance and all of that came at the time that Garvey was bringing this larger picture that we're connected globally.
I don't know whether it's because he's the Caribbean, but in the early part of the 20th century, it was something that was vital to the discourse and I think the progression of ideas in the African American community.
With the help of his friend Wilfred Domingo, Garvey finds work as a printer, and he begins to speak publicly about the UNIA and its aims. He embarks on a 38-state tour promoting the organization while surveying life in America. He had intended to return shortly to Jamaica, but encouraged by the reception he received from black Americans, he decides to stay a little longer.
He was very attractive to large numbers of people. He was very bright. He was very assertive. And he's gaining this power in the black community. It's not just those West Indians. It's all kinds of black folks who are glad to hear this guy saying a lot of things that needed to be said.
When he was in Harlem, I remember my mom and dad and them talking about him and how proud they were to see this man looking like the general, you know, the major, as he walked through, and all the people that followed him and believed in him. We even bought stock. We bought that $5 stock that got him thrown in jail, okay?
In order to fully understand his place in history, imagine a world as it looked to him and many other blacks during the early part of the 20th century.
You have to think of a world in which the entire continent of Africa was under European control, with the exception of Ethiopia. You look at the Caribbean region, certainly English, French, Dutch, Spanish, that's under European control. So the world is largely one of white domination.
When World War I jumps off, Europe is now engaged in another struggle that draws in all these other people who are not Europeans, who were once their subjects. So when you see, for example, the British West Indian Regiment, all these Africans from the British Caribbean who are pulled into this conflict called World War I. And now, these are soldiers who are not going to just stand by and fight for Mother Britain. No, they're fighting for their independence. Same thing in the United States. Black soldiers drafted into World War I, who then go and fight. They fight in France, they fight all over, but then they come back to the United States and they say, yeah, we're not about to just get lynched. We're going to fight back.
World War I shattered this myth of white invincibility, but also this myth of white superiority. There are lots of interviews of black soldiers who see white soldiers quivering in fear, and they begin to realize, well, no, this story, this narrative that the colonials have created about our inferiority is wrong, right? So when Garvey steps onto the stage, which is very innovative ideas of organizing black people independently, of basically saying we must be in control of our destiny, the conditions already exist.
Marcus Garvey was the first to preach forcefully and unabashedly that black people had the right to interpret their own reality and control their own destiny. His entire life was consumed with seeing subjugated Africans respected and respecting themselves. He had awoken in Black America an awareness of what slavery and oppression had taken, the concept of nationhood. At the dawn of the Harlem Renaissance, Garvey introduced the new Negro.
A black person who was no longer feeling victimized, who was remembering our history before enslavement. We saw it, in the Harlem Renaissance, where through creativity, through the verbal arts, through, the music, black people were again affirming that there was a new feeling of power. That is what the new Negro was about.
By the middle part of the 1910s, you see Africans from the Caribbean, you see Africans migrating to New York from the South, you see Africans coming into urban centers, whether it be Washington, D.C. or Philadelphia, places like that, Boston, from other places. These are the new Negroes. They're not going to be satisfied simply with, we far away out of enslavement, we're going to get a little patch of land, and we're going to move forward. No. These new Negroes have something else going on. They're increasingly urban. They are in a space now where they are cheap to jowl on the subways, or on the buses, or on the sidewalks with these white people. They're not going to step off the sidewalk. They're not going to not look them in the eye. And so the new Negro, right, the pride they feel, really is captured in a wonderful phrase you see in some of the signs by the time you get to the first major convention, August 1920. You see signs that say, the new Negro knows no fear.
Not everyone was enamored with Marcus Garvey's message of black pride. In the United States, especially those who pursued an integrationist agenda, argued that his movement was both racist and reactionary, and that he didn't speak for black Americans.
I think that one of the things that we have in the United States is that we consistently have black people trying to figure out how do we get free. And we have lots of different strategies. I think that part of the criticism is born out of a sense in the black community that we don't have a lot of cushion. And so I think that part of what you're seeing in that is a fear that as Garvey is really catching on, that it may not work. It may not work. And then where are we?
Anytime a black man stands up and speaks what I like to say truth to power, people always, the larger masses of Americans always see him as a megalomaniac. That's the same thing they said about Malcolm. That's the same thing they said about anybody who becomes empowered. That's the same thing they said about H. Rap Brown, the same thing they said about Stokely, the Panthers. Anytime you won't turn the other cheek or you won't lay down and say, I'm going to be nonviolent, you're considered a radical. You're considered a megalomaniac.
I can't tell you how many people accused President Obama of being racist. All you have to do is turn on Fox News. People accuse Martin Luther King of being racist. If you think some of these people who are really focused on integration and peace and harmony were racist, then obviously you're going to have the same conclusion about Marcus Garvey and anyone else who you don't like.
The ideology of black empowerment took a foothold in thousands of communities throughout the world. Between 1916 and 1927, the period that marked the high point of Garvey's leadership, he would lead the largest mass movement of black people in history. The geographic breadth and scope of the movement remain unparalleled, almost unfathomable today. In 1919, Garvey establishes its official headquarters on West 135th Street in Harlem, 3 blocks up on West 138th Street. He conducts weekly meetings and other important events at an extensive one-story structure whose name is inspired by Liberty Hall in Dublin, Ireland. Garveyites identify the Irish subjugation under the British as a mirror of the suffering of black people worldwide. UNIA leadership encourages all of its branches to buy their own property and establish a Liberty Hall of their own.
The organization, under my presidency, grew by leaps and bounds. By my writings and speeches, we were able to build up a large organization of over 2 million by June 1919, at which time we launched the program of the Black Star Line. We succeeded, however, in making the Universal Negro Improvement Association so formidable in 1919 that we encountered more trouble from our political brethren. They saw the influence of Edwin P. Kilroy, at that time an assistant district attorney for the city of New York. On the complaint of the Negro politicians, he started to investigate us and the association. During my many tilts with Mr. Kilroy, the question of the Black Star Line was discussed. He did not want us to have a line of ships. I told him that even as there was a White Star Line, we would have, irrespective of his wishes, a Black Star Line.
Why home on this Black Star Line? Why home on this Black Star Line?
Even as the organization came under sharper scrutiny, the UNIA-ACL launches several business ventures, such as the Negro Factories Corporation, Black Cross Nurses, and famously, a steamship venture known as the Black Star Line, which would transport cargoes of African produce to the United States. On a cold day in October of 1919, several thousand supporters gathered at the 135th Street Pier in Manhattan to watch the SS Yarmouth, one of the ships of the Black Star Line, set sail on the Hudson River. It was not only New Yorkers who took notice. Onlookers in ports throughout the Caribbean and Central America marveled as the ship arrived. Thousands more read about the incredible Black Star Line in the Negro world. In this dramatic fashion, the ships raised the international profile of Marcus Garvey and his movement. Sadly, even though the beleaguered ships of the Black Star Line were found to be seaworthy, they would suffer gross mechanical failures, causing heavy financial losses.
One of the rumors is that the many FBI agents who infiltrated the UNIA sabotaged the Black Star Line, and there's some documentation of some things that seem to suggest that they indeed were doing that. Remember, the first FBI agents, the first black FBI agents ever hired in the history of the United States were hired to infiltrate Marcus Garvey's organization.
The fact that we had a White Star Line and that our people could have a Black Star Line, it meant a lot for the people. If you considered how many times this thing failed, and the people put up the money again, and put the money again, buy another ship, Brother Garvey, buy another ship, we're going to make it.
But to me, the story of the Black Star Line is really the story of the possibilities that it inspired in the imaginations of black people. And that's something we'll never be able to trace fully. I'll never forget the day Una Mozak put in my hand a little biography that her father had written, a paperback version of it called A Star to Steer By Captain Hugh Mozak. This was the man who was the captain of Marcus Garvey's ship, the Booker Washington. So I'm looking at this book, and then Una told me a story, and then I read the story for myself, and this was the genius of the Black Star Line, and may have even contributed to its failure, but we have to ask whether it was a failure or not.
As Hugh Mozak recalls, the ship would pull into Caribbean ports laden with bananas, vegetables, and other products that were destined for New York City. But a strange thing would happen. Every time the ship was about to pull out, the captain would receive